Thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Andrew Corbett-Jones. I'm the head of Tyro FinTech Hub. Wanted to welcome you to NewFinance, the Sydney chapter. Really pleased this month to have David Birch able to come and speak to us. By way of introduction, you've read the introduction we put on Meetup. I just wanted to tell you 3 things that you may or may not know about David. This is interesting. Of the Twitter accounts that innovators follow, David Birch is only number 10.
Must try harder.
Now, who here follows Richard Branson? Who here follows Bill Gates? Yeah, Richard Branson and Bill Gates follow David Birch. He wrote a book, Identity is the New Money. It will make you look at identity and new technology in a very different way. And I must say, this has been very highly reviewed by some senior critics in the UK. Well, the tell for me was I saw this, I was a bit concerned, so I read his review. And then when I read this, I understood everything. Dave's reality tunnel is hard-walled by function and utility. So I think we have a problem with the reviewer, not the book.
It did score a 4, though.
That's right. The top 10 influencers in European emerging payments. Dave's only number 1. As they say, a quarter of a century in consulting around the world, newspaper and magazine author, book editor, and media tart, which means something different in the UK. And would you please welcome David Birch?
Thanks very much. And thanks for the very kind introduction. I appreciate it, Andrew. Okay, what I thought I'd talk about this evening is digital currency, because I thought that's quite a hot topic at the moment. That would be quite interesting to talk about. So what I've done is I've divided the talk into 3 parts. So part 1 is, I thought it would be interesting to talk for a few minutes about what digital currency is. And then I thought it would be fun to talk for a while about who might issue, once we've agreed what digital currency is, talk for a few minutes about who might issue digital currency. And then in the last part of the talk, I'll kind of focus down more on what I think about who will issue digital currency. And this is my tattoo. This is how nights out in Las Vegas tend to end up. This is Money 2020 in Las Vegas. You can't quite read it in there. It's Latin. It says Quius regio eis pecunia, which only people who've benefited from a private school education would probably want to hazard a guess at, if anyone would. It means whose region, his money. In other words, basically, whoever's in charge gets to define what money is. And it means it in a... It means it... So basically what that means is, like, you can use whatever you want as money. That doesn't matter, right? So if you want to exchange cartons of Marlboro, or whatever it is you want to use the money, that's absolutely fine. But if I'm in charge, I get to decide what money is. And what that means in the modern context, the modern state, is it's taxation. So the currency of taxation defines what money is. So you can use whatever you like, but ultimately, if you've got to pay your taxes in cartons of Marlboro, then cartons of Marlboro are money. You'll see why I'm putting that up front as we move on a little bit. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about currency and digital currency to see where we're. So here is my basic claim. So people talk a little loosely about what constitutes electronic money, but because of my borderline autism, I think it's very important that we put these lines in and we're just very clear about what we're talking with these things. So to me, there's a very big distinction. So for example, just to illustrate the first 2, there's a very big distinction between electronic money and electronic cash. In my head, those are 2 completely different things, right? Electronic money is just an electronic version of money, no physical medium of exchange. But electronic cash is money that can go from person to person without any kind of central clearance, because that's how cash works. So you get the theory behind all this sort of thing. Okay. So to me, those are very different things. And if we drop down a bit and start talking about different kinds of electronic money, then I've drawn out 3 different categories that I want to sort of discuss before we move on. So first of all, I want to talk about virtual currency. So let's be clear about that. So a virtual currency is a currency that only exists in the virtual world. In other words, it has no mundane counterpart. So I think we can all agree about this, right? We're quite clear on this one. So a good example of a virtual currency would be World of Warcraft Gold. You've all heard of World of Warcraft. Anyone has heard of World of Warcraft? Oh, God, no. I thought I'd picked a horribly wrong example for that sort of thing there. So World of Warcraft is a very favourite example of mine for a couple of reasons. So first of all, this is one of my favourite videos on YouTube. It's one of my absolutely favourite videos on YouTube. And this is because it illustrates the virtual world so perfectly. And this is you can Google it and find it on YouTube. So this is a video of a guy playing World of Warcraft. I mean, they do video these. It's a guy thing, but they video, and then we look at the videos later on and in private between consenting adults. So this is a guy who's playing World of Warcraft, and he's recording the video. And as he's playing, it's very funny to me, he gradually begins to realize that he's the only human being playing. All of the other characters that you can see up on the screen are actually bots. So what happened here was, because World of Warcraft Gold was worth something, in fact, one of the most interesting calculations I ever saw was the discrepancy between income and life expectancy of Chinese World of Warcraft gold miners versus Chinese actual gold miners. So actual gold miners earn less money and have a considerably shorter life expectancy than World of Warcraft gold miners. And World of Warcraft gold mining is boring, right? Because you have to go around doing tedious, mundane things, repetitive, boring tasks, collecting up the gold. But you do it because you can sell it to other people. So what's happened here is people have set up these bots to go and do these mundane and repetitive tasks, to harvest the gold, which they can then sell to other people. And the whole thing got completely out of control. So here's a guy who logs in to try and enjoy the game and gradually discovers, and it's funny as he realizes it, everybody else in the game is a bot. And I hold that up because it's funny about World of Warcraft, but also as a vision of your future, frankly. Because haven't you been reading this stuff about Facebook chatbots and Microsoft chatbots and whatever? So the idea that in this future virtual environment, you'll be able to tell what's a bot and what's a person, I find that difficult now. Like, you go to the Barclays customer service thing, and my first question is like, are you a real person or a bot? You say, are you a real person? And they always say yes. Well, I'd say that if I was a bot, so it doesn't, you know what I mean? You talk about the attributes of electronic and digital identity. Mark my words, one of the most important and valuable attributes of a digital identity in the future will be is a person. I mean, just being able to know whether it's a real person. I mean, I don't always care, but some people are sensitive about these kind of things. Match.com and stuff like that. So there's an example of a virtual currency. It's meaningless, it's just bits, it only exists in that virtual world, but it has real value. And in fact, there are World of Warcraft gold exchanges where you can go. My youngest son, I have two boys, they play World of Warcraft all the time. I encourage them to do that rather than going to school, because I wanted them to learn about economics and entrepreneurship and capitalism and so on and so forth. And so they went to state schools in English, they didn't learn any of those kind of things. But in World of Warcraft, they learned all the essential skills of modern financial services. They learned how to corner, right? So they would arbitrage between the different exchanges. They would cheat the newbies out of all, because they would look around to find people who looked like they were new to the game, because they don't understand the value of anything. And so then they would underbid and steal stuff from them, and then they'd move it onto other exchanges. It's like having a little Goldman Sachs in the house. I was just so proud of them. But the point is, that was real. And my youngest son, he has a mobile phone app for trading on his. He's actually, we're in the car and he's on his mobile phone, looking at the prices of magic swords diverging on two different exchanges to get to the point where they want to make the right arbitrage movement. Or they find some magic item and they go around to all the different exchanges and buy all of them up, and then sit on the corner until people drive up the price so high, then they release them all onto the market at once. So to say it's virtual money is not to say it's not real money, if you see what I mean. So, okay, so virtual currency, only in the real world. The next thing is digital currency. Now, digital currency is currency that can be used in the virtual world or in the mundane world, right? So now we're talking about electronic money. That's a currency, i.e. is acceptable in the payment of taxes, but you can use in both planes, right? You can use it in the virtual world and in the real world. Now, of course, in a way, it's silly to phrase it like that, because if it's electronic, it exists in the it doesn't exist in the real world. It only exists in the virtual world. But you get the point. You can use it for exchanges in the real world as well as the virtual world. So a good example of that would be Ecuador. So in Ecuador, they have an electronic currency. Actually, strictly speaking, it's an electronic currency board, because the electronic currency is maintained with a 1-to-1 US dollar reserve. But the idea is the central bank issues the digital currency. That digital currency is acceptable in payment for taxes and various other things. And now the government, because the government can now issue things like welfare payments using the digital currency, they can save huge amounts of money. You all understand that physical currency costs far too much money. And worse still, the costs of physical currency are very unevenly distributed. So not only is the cost of having cash in the economy high, that cost falls disproportionately on people that are the less well off, because it's a class. There you go, bringing class into it again. It's a class. So for normal middle class people like us, we never see cash from one week's end to the next. I couldn't care less if I never saw cash again, right? I've got a US dollar an Australian dollar prepaid card in my pocket. I use that. Everything works absolutely fine. I have no interest in cash at all. But if you're somebody who's trapped in a cash economy, the costs of cash are extremely high. The cost of cash acquisition is high. If you're a poor person who has to operate in a cash economy, you're the person who gets robbed and mugged. You're the person that loses the cash without resource. You're the person that doesn't have access to low-cost deals online and all that kind of thing. It's very expensive to be poor, and cash is a big contributing factor. One of the other things that I particularly object to about cash, particularly in the UK at the moment, same thing happens here as well. So just to use the UK as an example, in the UK, 4% of the pound coins in circulation were counterfeit. So the Royal Mint has decided to reissue the pound coins in the UK. So we're getting 12-sided pound coins that are going to be made out of, I don't know, tin or plastic or something, whatever's cheaper than whatever they're using at the moment. And so the calculation, just to show you, because people don't think about the cost of money properly. So the calculation is from the Royal Mint, by making these coins out of tin instead of whatever they were made out before, we're going to save £30 million per annum or something like that. Whoopie-doo. It's going to cost £450 million in the first year to convert all the vending machines to take the stupid new coins. So instead of just saying, stop taking coins in vending machines, because this is a modern country. Everyone in Britain has got a mobile phone, and the people that don't have mobile phones aren't out and about buying things from vending machines. So just stop doing it. We have a profound conservatism about money, which is a drag on the economy. The money that's wasted on armoured cars and ATMs and whatever could be much better applied to other more innovative and valuable functions in the economy. So that's electronic currency. So there's another reason why you might want to do this as well. It's just you probably don't spend as much time as I do looking at the figures for cash in circulation in BIS reports compared to the use of cash for retail point of sale in transactions. But if you look at a country like the UK, in the UK, 48% of retail transactions are now in cash. It's below a half. If you look at the way the curve is going, it's going down slowly but steadily falling down. Okay? So the use of cash in retail transactions has been falling in the UK essentially since records began, since my records began. It's not that long ago. But the amount of cash in circulation has steadily gone up, and it continues to climb now. So there's what's called a cash gap. In other words, the cash that's being used for legitimate purposes, essentially retail transactions, is going down, but the total amount of cash in the economy is going up. And that's because, even under the Bank of England's own figures, only about a quarter of the cash in circulation is actually being used as a circulating medium of exchange. So the overwhelming majority of the cash that's out there is only used for drug dealing and money laundering and corrupt politicians, this kind of thing. It's under mafia overlords' beds. It's not in circulation at all. And that's problematic because that represents a cross-subsidy from people like you who are law-abiding and pay their taxes. You're effectively cross-subsidizing. You're making it as convenient and easy, as cheap as possible for criminals to execute transactions. And I don't think that should be public. I haven't thought the whole thing through, but on the whole, I think I'm probably against that. I think we should make an effort to try and make criminals pay a little bit more for this sort of thing. Actually, if you look at the UK figures for cash in circulation, in the UK and the US and many other countries, you see a divergence between the high-value notes in circulation and the low-value notes in circulation. So in the UK, £50 notes, which you never see, you never see a £50 note. The number of £50 notes in circulation is going through the roof, whereas the number of lower-value notes in circulation isn't. And the reason for that is because the low-value notes are the notes that are used for legitimate commercial purposes, buying things in shops. You can't even use £50 notes in lots of shops. We have an office in New York. If you go I never do this, but if you went to the ATM and drew out $100 bills, you can't even spend them. You might as well try and spend Confederate money. You can't spend $100 bills in New York. Why are they printing them? The European Central Bank has just announced they're going to stop printing 500 euro notes, although they're going to remain legal tender for no reason I can think of. But I've never even seen 200 or 100. When you go to the ATM, you get 50 euro notes. That's what you use in shops. There's no point printing these other notes. So there are lots of good reasons why you might want to go over to digital currency as opposed to physical currency. There are economic implications around this, which are too complicated to go into this evening. But remember, the way that money gets into circulation right now is that it's created by commercial banks. By making loans, essentially. So if you take that away from commercial banks and you produce all of the... So for example, the Reserve Bank of Australia could just say, right, everybody in Australia, as from tomorrow, has to have an account at the Reserve Bank of Australia. That's it, that's the rule. And when that was discussed in the UK, I can't remember, I went to a thing a few months ago where this was one of the things that was being discussed. One of the arguments that was put forward against that was, well, that would be... I can imagine in Australia, but the RBA would have to have an account for everybody in the RBA. Actually, I don't even know how many people there are in Australia. I probably should have looked that up before I came. Was it like 20 million or something? Or 23, okay. So the RBA would have to have 23 million accounts, and they'd all be driven by mobile phone. You remember doing, oh my God, what an insurmountable barrier. Well, M-Pesa in Kenya has more accounts than that, and it seems to work absolutely fine. Facebook's got 1 billion accounts, and it seems to stay up. So I'm sure the RBA could find a way to manage 23 million accounts. But if you did that, you take away the money creation rights from the commercial banks, and you've got to find some other way to make the system of loans work properly to support the economy. Okay, then we move on to cryptocurrency. So once again, a huge distinction in my head between digital currency and cryptocurrency. Digital currency has to be cryptographically secured, right? It would be very stupid to have a digital currency that didn't have cryptography to keep it safe. But that's not the same thing as a cryptocurrency. A cryptocurrency is a currency whose value is determined by cryptography, right? That's, for example, not Australian dollars. The value of the Australian dollar is determined by lots of other factors, none of them being cryptography, okay? The value of a cryptocurrency is determined only by the cryptography. It's not backed by something else. If it was backed by something else, it would just be a digital currency, which is completely different. So cryptocurrency is a very special category. So here's... I have a whole load of screenshots of utterly ludicrous things to do with Bitcoin and blockchain. The whole thing's getting completely out of control. So this was the headline, and this is the sort of thing the Bitcoin people send you, So I put something on Twitter, which is mildly less than 100% completely enthusiastic about Bitcoin. And it's like a heresy. Literally it's like a heresy, because Bitcoin's a religion to those people. It's got a creation myth, this mystical founder that nobody really knows who he is, And you've got, like, Craig writes like St. Paul, and he's been coming out writing letters to people and all this sort of... the whole thing is very... You know what I mean? Like, there's something odd about it. And the Oka Satoshi on the scene now is just very... Anyway, but the point is, so I say something mildly critical about it, and they send me things like this. Bank of England to launch its own cryptocurrency. And I'm like, fuck me, this is amazing. The Bank of England's going to launch its own cryptocurrency. God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Wait a minute, I haven't heard about that. If that was I would have heard. And of course, you go click on it, and what it says is, the Bank of England have part-funded a research study at a university looking into a pilot scheme to explore the possibility, right? In fact, this is a good example. So actually, I should have said this at the beginning, but we have a weekly podcast series on iTunes. I mean, you guys, anybody here like podcasts? Vic, you occasionally, yeah. So if you go to iTunes, or you can go through our website, we have a weekly podcast series. It's a different person around the industry each week. And actually, the woman at UCL, who was the cryptographer behind this, Sarah Meiklejohn, is a very smart person. And if you go and look at the podcasts from about 2 months ago, you can see a podcast with her talking all about this. It's a fantastically interesting research project. The Bank of England is not going to issue a cryptocurrency. I can say that with absolute, rock-solid certainty. Why would a central bank issue a cryptocurrency? That's idiotic. The point of central banks is to manage the currency. So let's have a currency we can't manage, right? I can't think of anywhere that would do... Well, Venezuela possibly, but that's socialism for you, isn't it? I don't. So anyway, so the point is, cryptocurrency is currency whose value is determined by cryptography, not by an external issuer. So let's just be very clear right now, no central bank is ever going to issue cryptocurrency. This will never happen. We can say this with complete certainty right now. Now, and certainly not Bitcoin. Like in this, I mean, this is AusCoin, which isn't the same thing. But if on the Bitcoin newsfeed, you see these things all the time. These deranged fantasies that Ghana is going to use Bitcoin instead of it, or whatever they're talking about in this kind of thing. It's mad. And actually, if you look up I don't know if anybody's done these calculations, but Bitcoin is on course to use about as much energy as Denmark does. That's the current benchmark. Denmark is the benchmark for energy use in this sort of thing. So pretty soon it's going to use as much. So basically, I worked it out, it's about 4 tons of CO2 per Bitcoin generated at the moment. And the CO2 trading is running at about £80 per ton of CO2. So at the moment, every Bitcoin that's generates about 4 tons of CO2, which if you had to buy the offset certificates for it, would be about $500 worth of CO2. It's absolutely mad. And that statistically, no one is using it, right? And statistically, if you look at the trading volumes and you match those up against the number of people in the world, statistically, no one uses Bitcoin, and it uses as much energy as Denmark. If anybody actually started using it for anything, it would be an absolute disaster. Well, for the Maldives, not for... I don't mind. We live in Woking. We're well above sea level, so we wouldn't mind it warming up a little bit, to be completely honest. But okay, so those are our basic terms. So is everybody comfortable? No one's disagreed with any of that so far. So okay, good. All right. So now let's think about who might. So let's imagine now we're going to get rid of cash in some way, and we're going to have digital currency instead. So who might issue? So remember, we've got the distinction now between virtual currency, digital currency, cryptocurrency. So who might issue a digital currency? So I've got five categories of organisation that might issue a digital currency, with my suggestion as to why they might issue a digital currency. So broadly speaking, a central bank might issue digital currency, basically to save money, get cash out of circulation. There are other control reasons. So if you spoke to economists about that, they'll say one of the main drives for central banks to look at digital currency at the moment is to reduce what they call the zero lower bound. So the theory is at the moment that central banks can't reduce interest rates below zero, because if they reduce it below zero, people would draw their money out and hold it in cash instead. Now, it actually seems that that's not true. So one of my bedtime reading documents last week was the latest report from the Bavarian Savings Association on the crossover costs of cash management outside the institutions. I am a riot. I am a barrel of fun, Amanda. I really am. So this is what I keep hidden under my pillow. Everyone else, it's porn mags. But with me, I'm trying to keep it out of my wife's sight. The Bavarian Savings Institute report on the crossover calculations for cash outside institutions. I'm not boasting about that. I'm telling you as a tragic warning on the sad trajectory of my life is why I'm saying that. I'm not boasting, it's a warning. So, so their calculation is that if interest rates fell to about, I can't remember off the top of my head, it's on my blog, I think their calculation was about minus 0.15%, because it wouldn't be zero, because the costs of holding cash are not zero. So if the interest rate fell to zero, you still wouldn't draw the cash out, because it would cost you something to manage that cash. So the question is, how far does the interest rate have to go below zero before the cost of cash management equals that value? They say it's about minus 0.15%, which actually the interest rate's already gone negative past that point, and people haven't drawn out the cash. So there's something wrong with that calculation. But economists will say getting rid of the zero lower bound on interest rates will give central banks additional tools for monetary policy. And if it was implemented through a digital currency, then instead of the quantitative easing that you have now, whereby central banks essentially print money out of thin air in order to buy assets from commercial banks to give the commercial banks money that they're supposed to lend out but actually keep and pay to themselves in bonuses, you could have what they call helicopter money. So the central bank would do the quantitative easing by just dropping the money directly into the digital currency accounts. Like if everyone in Australia had to hold an account at the Reserve Bank, then if the Reserve Bank wanted to do quantitative easing, you just give the money to people, right? And then they would go out and spend it in the economy. So so there are plausible reasons why a central bank might want to issue a digital currency. The second category would be commercial banks. So that would essentially be what we have now, except the commercial banks would be issuing digital currency instead of physical currency. Now, and the reason for doing that would be to keep the economic structures in place so that so that commercial banks could function essentially as they do now under the control of the central bank. So it sounds like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just cut out the middleman? But as I said, banks perform economic functions, and you might want to maintain those economic functions to keep the structure of the economy the same. The third case, so this will be, so for the aficionados in the room, the second case is called Hayekian money, because the economist Hayek, remember the road to serfdom and all that sort of thing? So Hayek favoured competitive issue of money by private banks. So this would be the electronic version of the Hayekian implementation. The third example is company money. So that says, why would you restrict the issue of money to banks? Why don't you just let anybody do it? Well, any company do it. And so the argument there would be that companies would issue their own money. That money would essentially be a claim on future products and services, because the companies would be the redeemers of the money. And that money would trade at a variety of discounts. So for example, if you set up a new company, instead of issuing shares in the company, what you would do is you would issue money, which was a claim on the future products or services of that company. And the economic reason for doing that is because in theoretical terms, the foreign exchange markets that would operate in that way are more efficient than equity markets. So the idea is you have all of these different monies in circulation, and companies maintain baskets of them. Now, that sounded nutty when it was introduced, like in the 1990s when this kind of thinking was going around, because people then were like, how would you possibly keep track of all of the different kinds of money? But actually, the thing to bear in mind is you wouldn't, because that's boring trivia. Like that's exactly the sort of thing mobile phones are supposed to take care of. So the fact that there's 10,000 different kinds of money in your account, you wouldn't care. It's not your problem. It's your phone's problem to sort all that out, or Watson, or that computer that won at Go. It's not your thing. Somebody else would do this for you. So I would look on my phone, and my phone would say, you've got 273 Wessex groats. This because we're going to go back to groat. So after Brexit, we're going to have Wexit, which is the campaign for the independence of Wessex. And because the England experiment is coming to an end for us. And so once the dragon banner is once again fluttering over a proud and independent Winchester, we're going to go back to the Wessex groat. So when I look on my phone will say, you've got 273 Wessex groats. What I've actually got is this basket of different currencies, which I don't care about. I just set general policies to my phone and let my phone take care of it. Actually, I probably download the policies from other people. The fourth case would be community money. Now, community money, so I mean something quite specific by this. So I say there is non-credit money. So everybody sort of understands what this is at the most local of levels. This is the sort of babysitting tokens, right? So we create money within a community by doing stuff. Put to one side what that doing stuff is. But there's no credit, right? There's just pluses and minuses. And in that kind of environment, what you get is a situation where the transactions within a community are quite efficient because they're just ledger transactions against this currency, which is never settled outside. But transactions between communities, become slightly more complicated and attract some charges and so on and so forth. And so the idea here is that whereas in the old days this sort of didn't work, people tried a lot of these local currency experiments, and the currencies, either nobody used them or they collapsed or whatever. But locality meant something different back then. Like locality had a slightly hippie quality to it. This is like the Brixton pound in London. It's economically senseless. I mean, the reason why you would hold Brixton pounds isn't because of economics. It's for other reasons. But there are lots of other reasons why people might want to use the money of different communities. And in particular, if some of those currencies demonstrated, represented, maintained specific values of those community, then actually if you're part of that community, you might well want to use that money. I'll give you an example of it in a minute. So communities might issue money. And I think actually personally there are reasons for thinking that having money which is more closely linked to the values of the community that created it does give us somewhere to go with the new technology. There's a point to the new technology in that direction. And then the fifth example is cryptography, which we'll get into a bit later on. So the 5 C's, right? So broadly speaking, 5 categories of people that might plausibly issue this digital currency. Well, I'll just make one little point about that. So the Ecuadorian issue of digital currency, as I mentioned earlier on, is strictly speaking not a currency, it's a currency board. And the reason is because it's a particularly fascinating case study, which is Ecuador. Does anybody know what the currency in Ecuador is, just out of curiosity? It's US dollars, yeah. So what they do is they issue electronic US dollars against a one-to-one reserve of actual US dollars. And so the theory is that the currency has strength because it's actually the US dollar. Of course, what everybody suspects is because it's the Ecuadorian government. I mean, I have no specific knowledge of the Ecuadorian government, but I mean, general principles of government mismanagement of the economy is eventually the temptation to issue electronic dollars that actually aren't one-for-one backed by US dollars in the reserve will become overwhelming, at which point that money will deflate. So the Ecuadorian dollars will be worth less than the US dollar. I think this is an inevitability, but anyway, it's a side effect. Actually, another interesting thing about that is they have a US 50-cent piece in circulation in Ecuador, which doesn't exist in the US. So they have them made just for Ecuador. And in Ecuador, they're legal tender, but in the US, they're not. There is no 50% piece in the US, but there is in Ecuador. A little bit of monetary trivia for you there. So, no, it's worth 50 cents, I mean, in Ecuador. So, commercial banks. So could commercial banks issue electronic money? Well, I couldn't resist this example because for the younger people in the audience, you may not be aware that actually commercial banks already tried this. So this is approximately 1 million years ago in Swindon, city of the future. So that's me at the launch of the Mondex electronic purse in Swindon, 21 years ago, in fact. And so I think this has an interesting... So we don't need to go into it in detail, but the point is, in the 90s, commercial banks thought, quite rightly, well, perhaps we should issue electronic money because it's cheaper than issuing actual money and cheaper than processing it, whatever. So if we can drive out physical money and replace it with electronic money, everybody's better off. And the technology they had to hand to do this was smart cards. And so they began to use smart cards to issue these different kinds of electronic money. Mondex, Visa Cash, Danmont, Semepa, I mean, hundreds of these things, right? And basically none of them worked. Largely due to bank incompetence, I have to say. So one of the lessons I learned from this is if you're going to have commercial organisations issuing money, banks may not be the best option for doing this, right? So I'll just give you one example, which is the NatWest ATMs in Swindon, right? So you got your electronic money card, you put the electronic money card in, you punch in your PIN, and then you say how much money you want, and then you take it out and walk away, right? That's how it should work. How it actually worked was, because they didn't want to modify the ATMs, you went up, you put your debit card in, punched in your PIN, took the debit card out, then you put your smart card in. Nobody ever did this. They put the debit card in and punch in the PIN. You might as well get money. Why would you naff about with a stupid card? Like, if you try to replicate existing processes through this, you're doomed to just spiral into decay with this kind of thing. But the interesting lesson of that is, in order to store money on a smart card like that, you needed high security. You'll see where this is going in a moment. And so people had to invent new kinds of operating systems for smart cards, primarily Maltos and Java card. And the purses, the electronic money, failed, but we still use those secure smart card implementations today, right? So the money itself didn't work, but the money drove the development of an interesting new security technology, which then went on to live beyond the money. Like, I'm labouring the point. Like, what I'm saying is these are like Bitcoin, right? And the smart card operating systems, Java card, whatever, that's like the blockchain. You know. Okay, good. I know it's a bit convoluted, but I think it makes a sort of interesting point. So the third example, by the way, I actually went, I thought it'd be funny, so I went to, I'll do anything to get retweeted. Vic will testify to this. I'll do literally anything to get retweeted. So I went there 20 years to the day, this is last year, 20 years to the day, I went there and I thought I'll go take a few pictures and see whatever. And I actually found a shop taking Bitcoin. And I thought, this is too marvellous to pass up, right? I go there 20 years after the launch, and there's a shop taking Bitcoin. So I went into the shop that takes Bitcoin. I won't tell you what kind of shop it was. I went into the shop that takes Bitcoin, and I bought something. And I said to the guy, can I pay with Bitcoin? And he said, yes, it's fantastic. All you have to do is like scan this QR code. Okay, so I get the phone out, and I've got a Bitcoin wallet on my phone, and I scan the QR code, and I say, okay, and so it's not working, so where do I get the other? He goes, oh, I need to generate a new QR code. Oh, well, I'm prepared to wait for that in the interests of science. You know, I'm not a normal person in these respects. So he gets his phone, and he can't remember the password for the Bitcoin wallet on the phone. So he goes and gets his supervisor, and it turns out she can't remember the password for it either. And so I said to her, how long have you been taking Bitcoin then? And she goes, oh, about 6 months. And so I said, well, how many people have paid with Bitcoin? She goes, you. Then I realised, I'm seeing these shops that have got these Bitcoin stickers. No one actually takes Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Like, they've got the Bitcoin sticker in the window, which it just says, you know, we're a happening shop. We're down with the kids. We know what's going on. But no one actually uses it for anything. It's just marketing, you know. Don't be fooled. No one uses the stuff. So, okay, company. So what's an example of where a company could issue money? Well, you know, a simple example, of course, is M-Pesa. I've used that before. In M-Pesa, you know, it's the telephone company that issues the electronic money. That electronic money essentially has a one-to-one peg against the Kenyan shilling. The deposits are held in commercial banks, but the commercial banks have nothing to do with money. And it works brilliantly, and you all know the figures. You know, 1/3 of Kenyan GDP goes through the system, and 2/3 of adults have it. And the best testimony to it, in the Journal of Payment Strategy and Systems, there was a paper on M-Pesa a couple of months ago, which was doing ethnographic field research from Kenya on M-Pesa and why it's used. The best possible use case I've ever seen. There was a guy in there who was quoted, he actually said, M-Pesa is the best way of paying for things because when you're drunk, you can't use it. And I thought it's very good. Different people have different reasons for using different payment systems. And a payment system that automatically cuts out when you're drunk, I can see the benefits to this sort of thing, It's like we need to think more widely about the use of electronic payment mechanisms. Now, so that's one example. So they've issued something that's pegged to the Kenyan shilling. It didn't have to be. They could issue any kind of money they wanted to. And in the early 1990s, there was a guy called Edward de Bono. Does anyone remember Edward de Bono, the lateral thinker? Here's one for the teenagers. Edward de Bono, he had this thing about lateral thinking. He wrote these books about how to think about things in sort of different ways. And he wrote a pamphlet which was very influential on me, if nobody else. He wrote a pamphlet called the IBM Dollar. And he argued, I thought, quite persuasively, for just allowing companies to issue their own money. And he said that, I'll come back to it a bit later on. But the point is, his point was that if you allowed companies to issue their own money, you'd have these vigorous foreign exchange markets and things would find the right level. Like instead of having a monetary policy, you'd have money that would sort of sort itself out. And
don't you have the companies in some way issue their own currencies with their frequent flyers and points and stuff?
I think actually there's something in that. So if I was forced to try and find, what's the difference between like frequent flyer miles and an actual? That's actually quite a hard question to answer. So I would say, generally speaking, a currency is a loyalty scheme that has a standing army. That would be my. So Australian dollars are like a loyalty scheme for the whole of Australia, and ultimately they've got an army which gives them an advantage over Qantas points. But I know what you mean. It's a paper thing distinction. In fact, I wrote. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say. I don't know the sensitivities of Australian audiences. I have bored female persons of the opposite gender with this story before. But as part of the research for my book, I did more than look at, I interacted with some purveyors of adult services because I was curious about payment mechanisms for adult services. And because I'm always looking for new opportunities for our clients in different directions. And I'm a bit nervous about it because I don't know how Australians take these things, but I'm very tempted to tell the story just because I think it's an interesting story. Do you think it'll be okay? All right, so I'll tell you the story then. So I was arguing with somebody about Bitcoin. It's very hard to imagine. I was arguing with somebody on Twitter about Bitcoin. What a stretch of the imagination that is. And the guy said, well, of course, Bitcoin would be very useful for places where you can't use credit cards and whatever. And I'm like what? And he goes, well, like this. And he sent me a link. And it was a link to Reddit. And I didn't know what Reddit was because I'm old. I don't use Reddit. So I just go, this is in the office, by the way. So I just go and click on it. It's a Reddit thing. And it's a link to a Reddit forum where women offer adult services of kinds that don't need describing in polite company. And so it was basically a picture of a naked woman holding up a Bitcoin address. And I told you before, my wife dates midlife crisis to exactly this point because I was looking at the picture at home in the evening. And so my wife came and said, well, what are you doing with this picture? I'm trying to figure out, how did they get that Bitcoin address split up like this so that it fitted on this? And she said, that's it, you're over the cusp. Gone. It was a heartbreaking moment for me, really, because it's very attractive. All I can remember about this woman is she had red shoes on and a Bitcoin address. And that's sad, really. So I clicked. I wanted to find out a bit more about this. So I went to the forum. And it turned out that actually none of them would. I mean, he'd picked the one example of the woman holding up the Bitcoin address. All of the other women, I'm not being sexist, there were men forum. I only looked in the women's forum. But all the others didn't take Bitcoin. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Let's find out why. This is a true story, right? So I knew what webcams were. I mean, I'm not so naive. I didn't know what they were. I just never used one before. So I go and click on it. And I said to the woman, can I ask you about your payment choices? These are my And she said, it's $25 for 15 minutes. You can ask me whatever you like. And I think she thought I was like a payments pervert. Like I wanted to go and say Visa again. You know, like, it's like, seriously, she thought I was a payments pervert. I won't tell you my wife's comments about that. But, so that was no good. So then I started to think, okay, I'll go and find another one else. And the women all had flags next to their names. And I was looking for the ones with the American flags, so I thought that meant they were American. But actually what it meant was they could speak English, which turned out not to be true, by the way. So I did click on a couple. Like, once you got past, like, basic body parts, I mean, it was a bit limited, the vocabulary around those kind of things. So it took me quite a while. But I eventually found this woman in Ohio to talk to. And that got me interested in the topic, and I clicked on a couple more. And I discovered that the most common payment mechanism, actually I'll ask you, because you seem like people of the world. And I'm pretty sure you haven't read my book. So what do you think was the most common payment mechanism? Have a guess. What, sorry? No. PayPal was a very good example. No, I'm not saying that none of them took Visa. I'm just saying it wasn't the most common one. So PayPal's a very interesting answer. More than one, and I put this in the book, more than one of the women I spoke to said, if you offer me PayPal, I will call the police. Not only do I not take PayPal, if you offer me PayPal, I'll call the police. And the reason they did that, well, you guys know how payments work, right? So why didn't they want PayPal? What? Because of chargebacks, because it's reversible. So what would happen is people who were actual perverts, not payments perverts, would connect to the women, pay them using PayPal, and then as soon as they hang up, they reverse the transaction. And if you're a merchant who's had the transaction revert, you know what a pain it is in PayPal to get that reversed. So actually, no. They say if you offer to pay with PayPal, they assume that you're a criminal scammer and won't have anything to do with you. Any more guesses? I have to tell you, the most common payment mechanism was Amazon gift vouchers. And this is how it works, right? So, I go and connect to the woman's site, and we agree on certain services to be performed, okay? I go and make up a random email address using Hotmail, and I log into Amazon, and I make an Amazon account with that random email address. Then once you've made the Amazon account, you use your actual credit card. Yeah, that's step 3, if you want to put it down in there. Yeah. So step 3. So once you've got the Amazon account, you buy a gift voucher with your actual Visa card, right? And then you send the gift voucher by email to the girl, and it's instant. And she clicks on the gift voucher, and it's instantly credited to her account. So she knows my bogus Hotmail address, and I know her bogus Hotmail address, but she doesn't know my Visa card number, and I don't know her real account. But it's instant and irreversible, and that's why it was the #1 favorite payment mechanism, because once you've double-clicked on it. And I actually did go to one of our clients, and say, you know, clearly there's a huge market for this two-sided conditional pseudonymity in online transactions, so why don't we make a product that you know, and they said no, basically, to cut a long story short.
So I'm assuming they're not buying books, how do they redeem that?
Well, because you can buy anything on Amazon. You could pay me with Amazon gift vouchers and I'd be perfectly happy with it. I spend so much on Amazon every month. I'm an Amazon Prime member. My wife, we're extremely lazy people. I mean, we set quite a high bar on laziness. So we buy everything on Amazon. I remember my favourite example was the egg. We had this egg poacher, and the handle on the egg poacher eventually fell off. And like a few years ago, you would like put it on a list, and next time you went into town, you would go to the hardware shop and buy an egg. And the handle falls off the egg poacher, whatever, just put it on Amazon. You know, I don't care. The egg poacher will turn up tomorrow or the day after, you know. We go shopping together and we're like, oh yes, nice, we could use with one of those, whatever it is. oh, these are really nice ceramic monkeys. We need some ceramic monkeys for the living room. So you go to Amazon. I can't be bothered to carry ceramic monkeys home, so you just order them on Amazon, and they just show. You could pay me with Amazon gift vouchers. I'd be perfectly happy. They're a liquid currency. My boss, my CEO, I mean, his wife was telling me, she went to a farmer's market. We live in Woking, this sort of thing goes on. So she goes to a farmer's market, she buys some stuff from the farmer, gets to pay, opens her bag, she's got no purse, she's left her purse at home. So she starts rummaging around in the bottom of her bag, and she finds some Marks and Spencer's vouchers and pays for it. They're accepted at par. Like, I live in a part of the country where Marks and Spencer's vouchers are money, right? There's no one would care about accepting Marks. Everyone goes to Marks and Spencer's. Amazon, Boots, these are liquid currencies where we are. If I paid you in Woolies vouchers, Coles maybe, if I paid you in Coles vouchers, would you care? No. So yes, as a long-winded way of answering the question, I think you're right. There are already private company currencies in circulation. And as long as you think Amazon is going to continue to exist, you would happily accept Amazon vouchers, right? And you can certainly imagine a situation where, for example, if I'm a company and I go to Amazon and say, okay, can I buy $100 million worth of Amazon vouchers, and I'll give you $99.97 million for it, and Amazon will say, oh, it's 300,000 straight profit in the bank. Of course, why not?
Is crowdfunding in that category where you say, I'll promise you a product once you create a development money and I'll pay you back?
Now, actually, you're jumping ahead and spoiling my presentation at the moment. So I'm going to ask the audience to strike that last remark from the record, if they don't mind. We'll come back to that in a moment. Right, community. So I was thinking, what would be an example of a community currency? So if you have, so where would you find a community that would want to have its own money because that money had some specific values which were meaningful to the community? And the obvious example, I thought, is the Islamic diaspora. So you could imagine like an Islamic e-dinar, which was Sharia compliant, it's not an interest-bearing currency, and within that community you have lots of trading. People would cheerfully pay each other using Islamic e-dinars without the slightest bit of trouble. And actually, because that currency connects with values that they have, I'm pretty sure they would prefer to use that currency, even when it might be marginally economically advantageous to use other currencies. So that, there are straightforward, when I say community, I don't mean hippies living in a thing near Brighton. I mean, I'm using community in a larger and more expansive word. If we're all part of a particular community and we want to express the fact we share the values of that community and we want to minimize the transaction costs within that community, we use that community currency. Now, as it happens, we all live in multiple overlapping different communities. We don't live in one community. And so actually this idea of community-focused currencies is a much more powerful and much more interesting thing. So if we're thinking of it in terms of the 70s, kind of like time dollars and Ithaca dollars and things like that, yeah, it's kind of limited. But we don't live in a community. None of us do. We all live in multiple overlapping communities. And the ability to use the money that's matched to those different communities is actually really rather interesting. And it's actually one of the reasons why I'm so utterly convinced that we will never end up with a single currency. It will never happen. Because that kind of imagines that we live in this one community that's defined by geography, and that isn't how we live. And besides, this theory of optimal currency areas would suggest also that actually those different communities could be different optimal currency areas because the currencies are different and have different functions. So just as the euro, is an insane idea and will never work in the long run because the economy of Greece and the economy of Germany are so different. Well, the economy of London and the economy of Middlesbrough are really pretty different. There's no obvious reason why they have the same currency. It's not transparently obvious why Western Australia would have the same currency as New South Wales. Now, we've gone past the point, 50 years ago, where there was some administrative convenience to this, people transporting money across borders. But once you go electronic, why would you bother? It doesn't matter. What does it matter if the money here is different from the money there? It has a different interest rate and different monetary policies associated with it. And the final example is cryptography, which is the example that you spoiled. So I was trying to think of an example of a community that's creating its own currency and using that currency. And I think the example of Ethereum is a very illustrative example at the moment. So the Ethereum, they're what they call the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization. So they've created a company, the DAO, which essentially is owned by nobody and everybody, and is governed by smart contracts and lives in cyberspace and all this sort of thing. Like, you know, it literally is like a William Gibson construct. And it's funded by, Ether, which is the currency of Ethereum. And they've raised more than an equivalent of $100 million. And that was in, I can't remember, was it 2 weeks or something? I don't even remember. It wasn't that long. And they've got $100 million plus equivalent of Ethereum currency, which has already been crowdfunded, and they're going to use to invest in these different companies. So not only is it a plausible hypothesis, it's already happened. You know, we can actually point to that really happening. Okay, so there's 5 different possibilities for the issuers. So let's move on to the last part, you'll be relieved to know. So let's try and construct a narrative from, well, let me try and construct my narrative from the things that we've learned so far there. So the first point, will there be an AusCoin or an AusPESA? I think probably not. So there's the Edward de Bono quote that I had in my head earlier on. So Edward de Bono said, he looks forward to the time when it isn't that the Federal Reserve is in charge of things anymore. The market is in charge of things, and in the early 19th century, David Ricardo very, very famously said, in the use of money, everyone is a trader. And I think de Bono's point about having private organizations issuing these multiple different currencies is a very good one. The reason I'm not absolutely convinced about that as the way forward is because I feel that it doesn't quite connect with the point about communities and values, which I think might be more dominant in the more decentralized future that we move towards. So I think instead we're moving into an era where there's going to be a great many different kinds of money, currencies coming into existence. And those different kinds of monies, I think I have good reason for thinking are more related to community. And here's the Paul Seabright quote, money symbolizes the way we're connected to strangers as never before. Now of course, those connections are not all physical. They're through social media and networks and whatever. And actually that strikes me as being a rather interesting factor. So the fact that we're connected to more people and the fact that those people share money with us means something. It isn't just a comment on the way things are going to work. It means something a little bit more. There's a guy called Charles Raab, who's professor at Edinburgh University. I saw him speak many years ago, university actually, and he gave a talk about digital identity and he made this point which really stuck with me. He said, in the world of postmodernism, it's no longer clear that any one identity is real, right? And he was commenting on, this is this kind of Umberto Eco construction of postmodernism, which I'm sure you're all quite familiar with. So, and he says the essence of postmodernism is relativism. The essence of postmodernism is relativism. And so what Raab is saying is that applies to identity as much as anything else. So there's Dave Birch, my work identity. There's Dave Birch, my home identity. There's Lead Belly Gut Bucket, the mightiest of the dwarven defenders of lead, which is my D&D identity. There's my Man City fan club identity. But the idea that any one of those is more real than any other is just wrong. And the fact that one of those identities has been privileged in a way, doesn't matter when you move into these kind of reputational economies. So you're talking about lots of different currencies for lots of different communities. You're talking about each of us having lots of different identities that fit into those different communities. And so somehow the kind of reputational characteristics that are attached to those identities, which link them to the communities, somehow become the essence of where money goes. I'll finish with a comment from a social anthropologist. So Jack Weatherford, who wrote a very good book on the history of money, It's called The History of Money. And has written a few other things. So Weatherford, and I think social anthropologists are interesting people to listen to in this space because they have a kind of, so taking what I know about the technological trends and fitting that to what the social anthropologists observe, I think gives us a connection. And Weatherford says, he said, when you look at these things, the electronic money world looks more like the Neolithic world. And what he meant by that was that in the Neolithic world, there wasn't any money. The mutual cross obligations within a Neolithic clan were all memorized. Like the fact that I'm going to put the roof on your house because you gave me a goat or whatever it is, that's just in our heads. And when you're living in your clan, everything works like that. It's just it's like France before the revolution. Like there is no money in circulation. Everything is just credit in people's heads. And then when you scale beyond that Neolithic clan, that doesn't work anymore. And you have to have some way of memorizing, some kind of tokens that record those debts. And that's the Kocha-Lakota thing about money as memory. And Weatherford says, actually, because of the interconnectedness, because we're living in these communities again, but we're completely interconnected to the people in those communities, social networks, social identity, is essentially taking us back to that kind of Neolithic clan model, where those mutual cross-obligations, especially within the communities, are just there. You don't need an intermediary of money to make things happen. So he says, he says, or he would say, if he was here, I'm sure. So he would say, technologists like me, we see this flowering. We see the inexorable and inevitable decentralization that comes with technology, which means basically anybody can have money. Any community can have its own money. These things will flower. And Weatherford says, if you take that on to the end point, eventually those communities begin to do away with money because they just record the debts that stand in their place, right? And I think the more I think about what he says, the more I think that the cryptographic techniques that have come into existence, which allow us to do things with money which we can't imagine the physical analogues of. You know, you can do things with cryptography that you can't think of physically. They don't exist in the physical world. You know, the idea that I can show you proof that I'm over 18 without showing you my actual age. It's kind of hard to, but with cryptography you can do that, interval proofs and zero knowledge proofs and so on. So I want to leave you with a terrible analogy, but I hope it will illustrate the point, which is that those kind of cryptographic techniques that you see embodied in Bitcoin and the blockchain and whatever, they're like I hope I'm not choosing a bad example. Everybody here remembers Back to the Future, right? The movie with Michael J. Fox. So remember the special component they needed to go back in time? It was the flux capacitor. So I say, like, you know, if you want an analogy, so blockchain, Bitcoin, these advanced, they're like the flux capacitor that's going to take us back to the future of money. The future of money is like the past. Okay, thanks very much for listening.
Who's got a question for David?
Thanks, David. That's excellent. In terms of cryptocurrency in particular, sort of the impact on credit expansion. I mean, if you're dealing with those kind of things, you don't have that ability to create credit, and the sort of implications of that. Would be interesting in your thoughts.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, my personal feeling is that actually the ability to create credit is an essential part of being able to manage the economy. If we want to live in a society where we want the government to be able to take actions to do things, so there's one of the floor. See, the Bitcoin kids, they've got this thing about, it's like going back to the gold standard. It's like an electronic gold standard. Have you heard this kind of thing? It's like an electronic gold standard. But they don't know what the gold standard was, and they don't remember how it ended up, which was in a world war and global recession, you know, which is not the absolutely optimum strategy, I think, for this kind of thing. And the reason is because so they would say, well, we want cryptocurrency because we want a currency that's not under the control of the government. And I'm like, I don't. I mean, that's sort of why I live here and not under some Somali warlords. I mean, I want to live in a place where things are under the control of the democratic elected government. And if it turns out that you're in a cycle where you need to do some quantitative easing, you need to relax credit or whatever, then sort of you should. So, I mean, you probably regard that as unutterably conservative and reactionary, but I think I want things to be under the control of people that I vote for. I don't get the Bitcoin thing.
Thanks for the talk. It was fascinating, and I'll definitely tweet something about it later because I took a lot of way to think about. But two sort of part comments, part questions. One, the scenario regarding people taking cash out of the banking system, and I actually work in the gold industry, so that comment was interesting. But firstly, and I can speak personally, and even just from our own clients, a lot of people actually have cash out of the banking system. Because the $100 that they would put in ANZ Bank, ANZ only keeps one of those dollars and pays less than the rate of inflation now. They're not drug lords, they're not money launderers. They're putting money, they're taking it out, putting it in a vault because it's safer there than it is in the bank. So my question is, actually, would you...
Technically, it's not safer there than in the bank, is it? Because the banks, by law, you know, have if ANZ goes bankrupt, you'd still get your money back.
And how would you get that?
Because it's federally insured.
And where would the government get the money from?
They print it.
Right. So my money is safe because it can be printed.
Yeah.
Is that not the whole reason there's the whole crypto movement now? People are looking at government-controlled money.
No, I don't agree. Look, with crypto movement, so there are some people that think that having money that's not under government control would somehow be better. I disagree with them, but I can understand the point they're making. I don't detect that in the teenage angry white male pseudo-libertarianism of the Bitcoin movement, I think is unrelated to the political philosophy you're putting out there. The Bitcoin political philosophy is basically, Mum won't let me have a PlayStation, so let's create a system whereby I can get a PlayStation. That's yeah. So I understand the point, but and of course this was a Hayek's point. You know, that's why he wanted the competitive private issue by banks. And I would say, if you look at the stuff I wrote about that in the sort of mid-90s, because that's when we were working for the banks on issuing electronic money, and I thought the competitive private issue might be the best thing. But as time goes on, and especially because what I've seen with the rise of social networking and so on, I'm tilting more and more towards the community versions now. But I just feel people's connection with the communities they exist in will be just so much stronger. Sharing those values. One of those communities might be people that want to use gold. I mean, that might well happen. I'm not convinced it'll be huge, but it's a possibility. Anyway, I thought I saw on the web this morning, everyone's supposed to be selling gold and buying silver, aren't they? That was this morning's stuff. Yeah, I don't understand it.
When do you think identity is going to be important and going to matter to the layman, the person on the street? Because, and my point is, sitting here, I mean, we're all sort of, you know, on similar pages around the identity and how you're describing it. Most people today would describe their identity by their passport. But to the person on the street, when I have a conversation with about identity, their eyes glaze over and they don't get it, not interested in talking about it, don't really care.
Have you got 5 minutes for a story I can tell about that? Again, no true story. So, do you guys know what Mobile World Congress is? The Mobile World Congress is the biggest annual conference for the mobile industry. It's like 90,000 people in Barcelona. And a couple of years ago, I was at Mobile World Congress, and a very good friend of mine came back to his hotel late. People go out very late in Barcelona. Dinner doesn't start until like 11 o'clock. So you don't get back to the hotel till 1, 2 in the morning. And he got back to his hotel very late at night, and there was a guy in the hotel lobby, just wearing a suit. And the guy recognized him because he was a speaker at the conference. And so the guy said, "Oh, listen, can you give me a hand? Because I'm in trouble." And so my friend said, "Why, what's the matter? What happened?" And the guy says, "Well, we went out for a few drinks on Ramblas, which is the street in Barcelona. And he said, I got talking to this Spanish girl, and we had a few drinks. and she invited me back to her apartment for a nightcap, and so I went back to her apartment with her, and we had a couple more drinks. And the next thing I remember, I woke up in the street, and my briefcase is gone, my laptop's gone, my wallet's gone, my passport's gone. All I've got is the clothes I'm standing up in. And he said to my friend, listen, could you lend me a couple €100 to get the train back home? And so my friend, would you have given him the €200? I'm looking at you as an exemplar. Would you have? I'm not reflecting on the moral of the moral character of any of the people in just a position. Would you have given him the money? See, you're harsh. You wouldn't have given him the money.
You want to know who he is. Is he really
Well, now we get to the point. So my friend said, what's your LinkedIn profile? And so the guy told him, my friend got his phone out and pulled the guy up on LinkedIn and said, oh my God, you used to work at a large Swedish telecommunications manufacturer. And the guy goes, oh, well, you must know. So, yeah, no, of course I know. He knows what. And that would be true for any of us. I guess it's that modern, what's that thing like how close you are to Kevin Bacon? I forgot what that thing was. Right, but if we did that, like I guarantee, if I connected to any of you in this room on LinkedIn, I guarantee we would know someone. It's just that's modern life, right? So, okay, so he sees him on LinkedIn and he knows who he is. So they go around the corner and my friend gives him the €200. And the guy walked to the train station and got the first train back. It's like 4:30 in the morning. Got the train back to major European capital city you can get to by Barcelona, get to on the train from Barcelona. And when he got off the train at the other end, he phoned the police and said, oh my God, I fell asleep on the train. And when I woke up, my passport had gone and my laptop had gone. I'd like to report a robbery. So, which is what he told his wife as well, as it happens. So just a little tip for you to add on that list down there. And the point of that story is, if you asked me to lend you €200, the fact you've got a passport is completely irrelevant. That passport tells me nothing about your reputation, right? So you're talking about identification, and I'm using identity as the shorthand. What we're really talking about is reputation, and this kind of reputation economy, which I think very strongly. And I think people are sliding into that already, right? It's just I'm not sure they've completely recognized what's going on. And because the whole thing's completely haphazard, because it's not organized in any way, it's not happening properly. So for people like us who are all connected on LinkedIn, the whole thing works perfectly well. But actually, I'll give you another example. One of the guys that works for me, we transferred him over to the New York office, right? Here's a guy, he's worked for us for 10 years. He's senior consultant, brilliant guy. We transfer him over to New York. He walks into the bank in New York and they won't give him a credit card because he doesn't have any sort of New York history. One of the companies that won the BBVA Open Talent competition in New York in the autumn was a company that's going to give people cards based on their LinkedIn profiles. So I think we can already, because if you show up in New York and I've never seen you, if I look at your LinkedIn profile, I can tell whether to give you a credit card or not. I don't need FICO scores and bank things and whatever. For any of you in this room to forge a convincing LinkedIn profile is so impossibly difficult, you couldn't do it. And there are companies like Trulio that can run the metrics straight away. They'll traverse the social graph and tell you this Facebook account is real, this one's fake. It's easy to do. It's really hard to make a fake LinkedIn profile or whatever. So I think that sort of thing's already happening, but it's happening in a kind of haphazard way because it's great. And we need a way, I think, to sort of formalize it in some way. So you using your digital identity in day-to-day things becomes normal. I know we always use the same favorite example, but the idea that you have to show your passport or driving license to show a bar that you're over 18 is ridiculous. This is exactly the sort of thing that cryptography can do for us. So I think we're already getting towards that. We just don't quite recognize it. There's an argument. I was looking at the feeds this morning from the UK. Big fuss in the UK. The Queen's speech in the UK this morning, because the Queen, she's your Queen too. So there's nobody smoking about this. So the Queen, she makes a speech in Parliament to announce all the upcoming government legislation. So, you know, all new laws in England have to be written on vellum, which is calf skin. And the Parliament in England just voted, just last month, they voted to continue writing all new laws on vellum because it's calf skin, you know. And so you cut up the calf and you get the skin and dry it out and then you write on it. And the reason is because there's vellum parchments from like the Middle East from like 5,000 years ago and you can still read them. So the Parliament just voted to continue writing laws on vellum. So I just want you to understand I come from a country that is so conservative. We're on the fence about paper. It's like, you know, we're not, you know what I mean? It's like a Chinese thing. We're trying it out. Don't know quite how it's going to pan, but, you know, we'll stick with vellum for the time being. Thank you very much. So in the Queen's speech, part of the Queen's speech, one of the government's legislative agenda is to institute an age verification, a national age verification system. So you can't log on to adult sites, gambling and whatever, unless you're... They have literally no idea how to do this, none whatsoever. And they've come up with all sorts of mad ideas. One this morning was to use credit cards to do it. Use credit card to age. You know what happens if you use credit cards for age verification? Ashley Madison, right? It doesn't take much imagination. If you make people give up their private personal details, you know, those will inevitably be stolen at one point. So, you know, this is the perfect example of something where there should be, you know, there should be national infrastructure to deal with these kind of things, and we don't have it yet. So I feel quite strongly about this, because I personally happen to think that it should be the banks that are in the vanguard of putting that sort of infrastructure together, because they've already done the KYC, AML sort of stuff, but no, we don't have it. So,
Dave, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Thank you very much, Dave. Really appreciate it. Would you please give him a warm thank you for that?